many of you guys remember those commercials? So yeah, I was going to start with a little joke about this. This portion of the service is brought to you by J.G. Wentworth, but I didn't know if that was appropriate or not, but I'm totally kidding about that. I just feel like that commercial just really kind of gets to the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you're new here, or if you've been here a while and you're wondering if we're going to start having commercials every day, the answer is no. But yeah, I just wanted that voice and that idea of it's my money and I need it now. I just kind of wanted that to be in the tops of our heads as we dive in to the sermon this morning. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Pastor Kylie. My husband and I are the co-pastors here. And if you've been with us the past couple of weeks, you may remember that we're in this series that's called Abundance. And if you haven't been here or if you've forgotten, I'm going to give you a little bit of a review. And basically, this series has been all about giving up our idols and just learning to trust God. Am I not on? Okay. I'm sorry. Could you get, am I on? There you go. I didn't, okay. So did you guys hear any of what I just said? Okay, good. All right. So yeah, we've been in this series that we've called Abundance because it's just about learning to live in the abundance that God has to offer us. And we're not necessarily talking about financial prosperity, although that is a part of it that we're going to get into today. But we've been mostly just talking about how when we live as if the only thing that matters is God, we can have freedom to just live in abundance, an abundance of joy and peace, because we don't have to worry about anything else. And so abundant living is really just worry-free living. And so today, like I mentioned before, we talked about giving up our idols and how God wants us to love him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then we also talked about how when we bring God our resources, he can multiply them, but we have to offer them up to him. And so we looked at this woman who had a jar of oil, and she had just recently been widowed, and the oil was all that she had. But God used that oil and multiplied it and actually provided for her and her sons for the rest of their lives because she was willing to give up the resources that she had. And so it was this amazing story that we talked about last week. But today, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. Today we're talking about a topic that makes me uncomfortable. And so I know that if I'm uncomfortable up here talking about it, there's probably going to be some uncomfort out there. So I just want to address that up front, that today, we might get a little bit uncomfortable. And I just want to be honest, sometimes, most of the time, I love preaching and I love being a pastor. I think it's like the greatest job description in the world, where you just get to, you spend your weeks just diving into the Word and learning all these awesome things about God. And then I get to come on Sunday morning and share all these awesome things that I've learned with people. But then there are other days when I don't really love preaching because there are topics in the Bible that are just really hard and really difficult. And unfortunately, today is one of those topics. I shouldn't say unfortunately because, the Bible just covers everything about the human experience. Because it was inspired by God, but it was written by humans and for humans. And so it just covers most of the human experience. And so sometimes, as you know, the human experience can kind of get uncomfortable. And so the topic that we're going to be talking about today is this idea of tithing. And so don't just, drown me out because of that word. But let's just admit that maybe we get a little bit uncomfortable when we start hearing, especially preachers, talking about money. Because I know that the church, especially the church in the past couple of years, has really kind of become to be known as just a place that wants my money, right? I mean, how many of you have heard or seen televangelists or, these pastors that you maybe come to know and respect, and then you kind of start seeing that maybe there's an undercurrent of all they want is my money. And so I don't want to come across that this morning, but I also want to come across with the truth that's in the Bible. And so that's just where I'm at today. So give me a little bit of grace as we dive into the Word today. So with all of that being said, for those of you that don't know me, that well. I am a pastor's kid. I grew up in a pastor's home with two parents who felt that it was their job to kind of instill in me some really important money practices. And so even when I was like 5 or 6 years old, if I would get birthday money from my grandma, they would teach me, okay, Kylie, you've got to save some, you've got to give some, and then you can spend some. And so that was kind of the money principles that my parents instilled in me in a very, very young age. And honestly, when I was really little, I didn't really question it very much, because when you're really little, anything that your parents say is the law. And so I just believed, okay, this is what you do. You save some, you give some, and you spend some. And so I just, I didn't really question it that much. And I remember my dad teaching me how to move the decimals to find 10%, which is an incredibly valuable skill to have. And so anytime I was given money for my birthday or for doing chores around the house, I would write down the figure, okay, $5, and I'd put the decimal place where it needs to go, and I would move it so I could figure out, okay, what is 10% of $5? And so usually when I was little, 10% came out to be no more than $1 or maybe $5 if I was really lucky. And I don't know if you've ever given away a dollar bill, but it's pretty easy to do. Even for a kid, I had kind of expensive tastes. I was really into American Girl dolls. If you've ever flipped through an American Girl doll magazine, you know that those are expensive. You're not going to be getting anything for $1 through that. And so I had kind of expensive taste as a kid. And so to me, it was really easy to give away $1 or even $5 because I knew there was nothing in that magazine that I was going to be getting with $1 anyway. So why not, give it to the church or whatever. And so when I was really little, I was probably what you could describe as a cheerful giver. Like I was always glad to have money to put in the offering plate. But then I got older, and I got my first job. And it was a frozen yogurt company called Orange Leaf. And, up until that point, like I said, my tithe had just been $1 or $5. But I remember my first paycheck when the paycheck was in the 3 digits. And so that meant that my tithe was going to be in the double digits. And I remember thinking, that's a lot of money. I'm just 16 years old. How can God expect me to give away $10 when all I got was $100 from this first job? And immediately, my mindset about tithing and about generosity just immediately flipped a switch. Because when you're not making a whole lot, it's easy to give it away. But honestly, the more that you make and the bigger that your percentage has to become, or that the dollar bills has to come to match the percentage, that becomes harder and harder. And it might have been because I was going through puberty and a lot of changes happened in that time, but immediately I went from being a cheerful giver to just, a reluctant legalist. Because I had this view of God that said that if you don't do the right thing, I will condemn you. And I had this view of God that kind of made me live in fear. I was very good at having a fear of the Lord. And I did not live in the freedom that Christ offers because I believe that the minute I do something wrong, God's going to condemn me and he's going to judge me. And so you better believe that I wrote out that tithe check because I knew that it was the right thing to do, but you also better believe that I did not round up. That first tithe check that I wrote, it was to the penny, 10% of my check. And yes, I know that I'm a millennial, but I did learn how to write checks. And so, my entire attitude had changed about this idea of giving. And honestly, you may be like me, but the reality is, if you're like the majority of Americans, you didn't have the kind of parents or the kind of upbringing that instilled in you these important money practices. And so, if you're like the majority of people, you probably have the same mindset as that commercial that we watched. This is my money. I worked hard to get it. And so I want to spend it the way that I deserve to spend it because it's mine. And so, it kind of comes down to this idea of greed. And greed is a really, really funny thing. I read in a quote this week as I was kind of researching for this sermon, I read a quote that says, most sins, they come out into the light when you're in community. And the longer you spend in community with people, the more likely those sins are to surface and get addressed. But greed is kind of the opposite of that. Because greed actually covers up easier in community. Because we can start comparing. And we can start saying, well, I did just buy this, but at least I didn't buy that. And so we can kind of, start to justify ourselves. And it doesn't matter if you're rich or if you're poor, if you stayed up all night this week worried about your bank account, or if you've never thought about it in your life. It can affect every single one of us at every level of the socioeconomic scale. And it is a topic that is addressed a lot in the Bible. In both the Old and the New Testaments, we're given incredible examples of people who not only, overcame the sin of greed, but they just believed in their heart and they knew through and through that the money in their bank account, or I guess in the olden times, the money in their gold bag or whatever they had, wherever they kept their money, they knew that it wasn't theirs. They knew that they had just been assigned as managers of that money. You may have heard the word stewardship. It's the same thing. Just being a manager of the money that God has put in your possession. And so today we're going to talk about this kind of difficult topic of learning how to look at your money differently and realizing that it's not all about, what can I do with it? But really it's about whose is it? And so that's really what it comes down to today. And so if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Mark chapter 12. If you don't, it's going to be up on the screen. And you may have heard this story before, and if you have, I want to really encourage you to not zone out. Because I know that sometimes, when we've heard something familiar, it can just be so easy to zone out and just say, oh, I've heard this before. I know where we're going with this. And you may have heard this sermon before. But even if you have, I just want to encourage you to lean in and listen, because the Word of God is living and active. And we can always learn from it if we're paying attention. So we're going to be in Mark 12, verses 41. And like I said, it should be up on the screen. And so Jesus, he was sitting in the temple. And just a quick background for you. In the temple, there were boxes, different boxes, and people would come in and actually put in their offerings. And back in those days, they weren't writing checks, and so they were actually bringing in bags of money to be put in the temple. And so that's kind of what Jesus is doing. He's just sitting down, and he's watching people come in and offering their tithes and their offerings. So anyway, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. I read this week that those 2 cents could have equaled as little as 1/1000th of a day's wages in that time period. Okay, so we're talking not even a penny. These 2 coins would have equaled not even a penny. And so Jesus called his disciples to him and he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others, all of those who were bringing in bags full of money. Her penny was worth more than those bags, because they all gave out of their wealth. But she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." And I just want to say this morning that Jesus isn't interested in the amount. He's interested in this sacrifice. And we have these rules in the Bible about, you want to do 10%. There's all these Old Testament laws about 10%. But the reality is, to some of us, 10% is a huge sacrifice. But to others, 10% may be the difference between buying a yacht or not. To those people, 10% isn't really going to be a sacrifice. And so actually, 10% is the minimum. Jesus asks us to not give legalistically, but he asks us to give sacrificially. And this woman who gave everything that she had, she understood something that is so countercultural, especially today, but I would imagine in her time too. And what she understood is that no matter what you're going through, no matter where you're at in life, God is the ultimate provider, and you can trust him no matter what. Last week, one of our major points, if you were here, you may remember, one of our major points was that when you are at the end of your rope, God is still faithful. And this widow, she grabbed onto that, and she staked her life that when you are at the end of your rope, God is still faithful. And so this idea of tithing and giving back to God, it really comes down to a question of whether or not we trust him. Whether or not we trust him. Because if we trust God, giving is a joy. But if we don't trust God, giving can hurt. And that is true for every single person in this room. Right? We live in a culture that wants us to believe that it's my money. I mean, I can't think of a better example than that commercial. And I don't have anything against J.G. Wentworth. Let's just get that out of the way. But we just live in a culture that teaches us to spend money however we want. And if you have anything left over after buying that new Apple product, or after getting new clothes, or after fill in the blank, if you have any money after that, then you give it away. But like so many things, the Bible takes that concept and it flips it on its head. And it says the tithe is the first thing you give, because it shows that you trust me. And maybe you've been through a circumstance, maybe you're going through a circumstance right now where your entire trust foundation is shaken. And maybe you can't hear what I'm saying because all you're hearing is the words in your head saying, but I can't trust God because I have been through yada, yada, yada. And so I can't trust him because he didn't bring me through that situation. And I can't speak to you on an individual level if that's you this morning, but I just want to say that there may have been things going on that you will never see. There may have been ways that God was providing for you or protecting you, even in the midst of that situation, that you will never know about. Because you are beloved, and you belong to God. And he's not going to take that for granted. He's going to protect you. And that is why God asks us to tithe. It's not because he needs our money. I mean, if you think about it, God is infinite. He is limitless. He is beyond human control. In fact, at one point, when Jesus was still on earth, there was this thing called a temple tax. And Jesus and one of his disciples needed to pay the temple tax, but they didn't have any change on them. And so Jesus tells the disciple, hey, why don't you go fishing and bring back the first fish that you catch? And so he goes and he fishes, and he brings it back. And Jesus says, okay, now open that fish's mouth. And inside that mouth of the fish was enough money to pay the temple tax. God doesn't need our money. What he needs is our trust. And he asks us to tithe so that we learn to trust him. Because trust isn't something that's just given overnight. It's something that we have to earn and that we have to learn how to give. And so that's what God asks us to do with the tithe. To remember that both it is his money and that we can trust him. Earlier this week, if you're friends with me on Facebook, you may have known, this is before I posted about the dog that we got yesterday. Earlier in the week, you may have seen that I posted a status that just said, hey, I don't remember exactly what I said, but something to the effect of, hey, I'm preaching about tithing this week. I would love to hear stories of how tithing has affected your life. And the story I'm about to tell you isn't exactly a tithing story, but it is just so powerful that I just wanted to share it. And I heard so many great stories, even from some of you guys, and that was awesome, and I loved hearing those stories. But this one was just amazing. And so my friend, she asked if I didn't give her name, so we'll just call her Sarah. My friend Sarah, she called me almost immediately after she saw that status. And she said, hey, I saw your status. I want to tell you about my experience with giving and with tithing. And I was like, awesome. Okay, let's talk. And so she said, first of all, you should know that I am stingy. In fact, I hate giving money away, but my husband loves it. Like, I'm just the stingiest person in the world, but he loves it. Okay, so she just wanted to frame that conversation with the mindset of like everything that happens in this story happened reluctantly on her part. Okay, so about a year ago, her husband, who loves to give, he's just, giving is probably one of his spiritual gifts. He came to her and he said, honey, God's been putting this family on my heart, and I just really think that we need to give X amount of dollars to them. And not only is she super stingy, but this was also a family that had recently ticked her off. And she just admitted to me, she's like, Kylie, I just want to tell you, I was mad at that family. And so not only did I not want to give, but especially not to that family. And so her husband was like, all right, well, I understand, but just pray about it for a few days before you say no. And if you've prayed about it, let's say 7 days. If you've prayed about it for 7 days and you still feel like it's a no, then it's a no, and we just won't do it. And so she's like, okay, that's reasonable. So she prays about it, and she really prays about it. I know sometimes we say, okay, I'll pray about it, and then 7 days later we're like, nope, answer's still no. But she actually spent some time to pray about it, and she felt God working on her heart. And she felt some forgiveness coming forward. And she felt, by the second day of her praying about it, she felt like she was supposed to say yes to this and that they were supposed to give to this family that had come on hard times. And they were already tithing to their local church. And they were already supporting a missionary on top of their tithe. They were supporting a missionary couple in Ecuador. But they just felt like they needed to do more than that. And so the next day, after this first conversation, she goes back to her husband and she's like, I don't need the 7 days. Let's do it. Let's give. We don't know where this money is going to come from because they were, at the time, they were paying $1,000 a month in debt repayment. Okay, so that is a big, huge burden. And they're like, I don't know where this money is going to come from, but we're going to do it because we feel like God's calling us to it. Okay, so I want to take a little bit of a detour here and explain where that $1,000 debt came from. When they were, a couple of years ago, this family felt like they were being called to move across the country to help kind of revive a local church. And so this family, they spent so much in their moving costs that they didn't have enough money to put a down payment on a house. And so friends from their other church, from the church that they came from, they said, hey, we've got this money here. What if we loan it to you at a 0% interest, and we'll come back with a repayment method that works for the both of us? Okay, so that's already incredibly generous friends. Okay, so that's where the generosity started, is with those friends years ago that said, hey, we've got this money, and we want to give it to you at a 0% loan. Okay, so then fast forward back to where we were at. So part of their debt repayment was student loans, and then the other part of it was their mortgage on their house. And so after they have this conversation with her husband, they're like, we don't know where this money's going to come from. But they're like, all right, let's do it. So they wrote the check, put it in the mail. And then the next day, the person that had given them the loan gave them a call. And they said, hey, this Sunday at church, I just really felt like God was telling us to be generous. He was just really working on my heart. And so keep in mind that Sunday at church would have been about the same time that God was working on Sarah's heart. And so she said, I just really feel like God is telling us to cancel your loan. And so these people just said, whatever you haven't paid, just forget about it. Okay, it's paid in full. You're a family who needs it, and you can probably do better with it than we can. So it is paid in full. And that was the day after she decided that she was going to no longer be stingy with her money. And you know what she said to me as she was telling me the story? She said, Kylie, I just felt like it was God affirming us and saying, you're starting a journey now. You're starting a journey of generosity, and I just want you to know that I'm going to be with you every step of the way. And so she then went on to tell me that what had once been $1,000 in debt repayment now gets to be $1,000 in generosity on top of their tithing, on top of their missionary support. They now have an extra $1,000 that they get to give away every month. And in her words, it is so much fun. That's the word she used to describe it. It's so much fun every month having this conversation and praying, like, okay, who needs the money this month? And then they just get to give it away. In fact, Dylan and I have actually been beneficiaries of this. A couple months ago at this point, we were going to the mailbox, just going through our mail, and we had a letter from them, and we were like, oh, that's weird. We opened it up, and it was a check. It wasn't the full $1,000. But it was just like a random check. It wasn't either one of our birthdays. It wasn't like a major holiday. We just like got a check in the mail. In fact, I actually thought that it was a mistake. And so I called them and I was like, well, actually I had Dylan call them because he knows them better. But so Dylan called them and was like, hey, we just got this check from you. We wanted to make sure it wasn't like a fake or, a scam or something. And she was like, no, we just wanted to be a blessing to you guys. And just what an amazing story of God taking someone's trust and multiplying it. Because generosity gives birth to generosity. And that is just kind of the overarching theme of today. And so maybe God is asking you to commit to something this morning. Maybe as you've been thinking here, as you've been listening, you've been thinking, you know what? I've been looking at my money as if it's mine. When the reality is it's not mine, it's God's, and I'm just the manager of it. And so if you've been thinking that this morning, I just have a challenge for you. I actually have two separate challenges. So we've got a couple different groups of people here this morning. So my first challenge is simply, if you aren't tithing, start tithing. And let's be clear about the definition of tithing. It means 10%. Okay, in the Old Testament times, as landowners and animal owners would count their tithe, they would literally hold up a shepherd's staff, and they would have the animals pass through. And every 10th animal that passed under the staff went straight to God. It didn't matter if that was the best animal in the flock or the runt of the litter that was sick. The 10th, whatever it was, the 10th one went straight to God. And so today I think a similar thing would be, as you're looking at your budget, instead of looking at 100% of your budget and then trying to take out 10%, take out 10% and then budget on the 90. Because then that 10% that you have, and whether or not you do it pre or post taxes, there's all these different things we can get into, whatever the Lord is leading you to do. But that is where to start. And so that's just what I want to encourage you to do. If you're not tithing regularly, to start tithing. And I believe, we already have it up on the screen. So the first commitment, we're calling this the 90-day challenge. So the first commitment is just, there's only 93 days left in 2018, newsflash. So this will be 90 days to the end of 2018. Just commit to that 10%. And if you're already tithing 10%, I just want to encourage you to add just a little bit more. And if you're already tithing to the church, then that little bit more can either come to this church or it can go to another organization. But I just want to encourage you to ask yourself, are you giving to God sacrificially? Are you giving to God sacrificially? And so just to be open with you this morning, Dylan and I fall into that second category. And so we're going to be tithing an extra 5% of our income here to LWC because we believe in this church and we believe in what it's doing. So for the next 90 days, we're going to be tithing an extra 5% of our income to this church. And so I just want to let you guys know that this isn't just something I'm asking you to do with no effect on me, but this is going to affect us as well. And we just bought a puppy. We don't know where this money is going to come from, but we believe that it's what God is calling us to do. And so anyway, if you want to commit to either one of those things, I would encourage you to just copy down what's on the screen and hang it somewhere where you're going to see it, maybe right after you get paid, so that the first check that you write goes to the place where you are being spiritually fed. And if that's not you this morning, if you don't feel like you're in a place where you can trust God with your money yet, then maybe my encouragement to you, this won't be on the screen, but maybe just instead of tithing your money, tithe your Sundays. And just commit for the next 3 months to just be in church. And it doesn't have to be this church. If you're here today and you're like, I'm never coming back here again, that's fine. We're not for everyone. But just be in a church on Sunday for the next 90 days. And just allow God to work in your heart and see if you can come to a place of trusting Him. So those are our three levels for the 90 days. The first one is to be in church every Sunday for the next 90 days. The second one is to start tithing 10% of my income for the next 90 days. And the third one, if I'm already in church and I'm already tithing, to just do a little bit more, either to LWC or another organization of your choice, as long as it's serving God and doing what He has asked Christians to do. And we're not going to ask for a show of hands or an altar call or anything like that. But I would just simply ask that if you're committing to one of these this morning, that you copy it down and sign it. And just so you guys know, Dylan and I don't actually know who tithes and who doesn't. We see a monthly report of what money came in, but we never see names. And we believe that's because we don't want to start having favoritism issues or anything like that. So I'm not going to know if you follow through on your tithing commitment or not. I'm not going to know, if you tithe for the next 90 days and then decide, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to know any of that. There's going to be no guilt trip if you don't follow through or anything like that. This is just between you and God. But I pray that God would begin to work in your heart and let you know that no matter what, you can trust Him. So let's go to the Lord this morning in prayer. Father, we just want to come before you this morning. And God, we just want to thank you that ultimately you taught us how to give sacrificially. God, because when you looked down on humanity and you saw what we were and the mess that we were in, you didn't give just a portion of your income, but God, you gave your Son so that we could have a relationship with you. So God, just first of all, we thank you for that. And second of all, God, I pray that if there's anyone in this room that you may be working on, that you may be trying to, just get them to trust you more, God, I pray that you would just help them address the very real concerns that come when we talk about giving away our income. God, I know that there are mouths to feed, there are bills to be paid, there are mortgages to be kept up. And I know that not every tithing story ends with a forgiven mortgage. But God, every tithing story does end with you providing. Whether that's miraculously or just through day-to-day life, God, you provide. And so I pray that as a church, as we begin to trust you more, and as we begin to walk into worry-free living, that our finances would be affected by that. And that we would learn to give sacrificially and generously, because that's what you've called us to do. And like any good leader, you don't ask us to do something that you're not willing to do. You give sacrificially over and over and over again for us. So God, we thank you for that. Lord, I just pray for these people as we're going about our week, as we're facing obstacles, as we're rejoicing, as we are just living day-to-day life. I just pray that you would give us all just an encounter with you in some way this week that would become more open to how you meet with us every day in little ways. God, it's in your holy and precious name that we